Hello, this is Jim McKeith, and welcome to this developer skill sprint on Android services for background execution. This skill sprint is specific to Android. It works with RAD Studio, Delphi, Object Pascal, or App Method on Android. It doesn't work with any other. Doesn't work with C++, and it doesn't work with any other platforms. So we're going to talk about what Android services are, how they're different, what they're used for, and then the different types of services and how to create and use those services with Delphi and RAD Studio. So a service provides background functionality. It can even run when the app is closed. So even after the app is closed down, the service can still keep running in the background. You can either set it up to start on boot or on other events, like for example, when the device connects to Wi-Fi, you can have your service start up in that situation there. So you don't have to have that service running all the time. The service can just respond to an event, fire up, do whatever it needs to do, and then quit again. The service can also be accessible by multiple applications. So this could be an interesting way to share data between applications, or if you have some centralized processing operations that need to take place that is then interacted with by multiple applications. Services are great for that. And also services can contain multiple threads. So threads are also used for background execution, but there's some differences between service and threads. Both can't access the user UI. They're both need to be, something else needs to happen in order to marshal them to the UI. But a service, the big difference between a service and a thread is a service can run even when the application is not running, and then a service can contain multiple threads. Whereas a thread, it is a thread. It can't contain threads. I guess it can launch other tasks, but it doesn't run when the application is not running. A thread only runs when the application is running, or a task is an example for a thread as well. You use tasks or threads in order to improve responsiveness of your applications, whereas you use services for long-running processes that may take place outside of the application's execution. So there's a few different variations on services. There's the intent service, which is launched asynchronously. And so with the intent service, you send an intent to the service, and then the service then responds later. And so if you want to have the service go do something, but you don't want to wait for it, you want to just tell you when it's done or whatever, that would be a time you'd use an intent service. If it's not an intent service, then it's synchronous. You tell it to do something, and then you wait for it to respond. Both intent services and non-intent services are bindable. You can bind to them with the onBind event, and with the bound service, the service runs as long as you've bound to it. And then once you've unbound from it, then the service will stop. Services can either be local or remote. So the difference between local and remote is a local service is only accessible by the host. And so in the manifest, it has exported set to false. And so that means only the host application, the application that contains the service, can access that service. Now that service can still run when the application is not running, but the only application that can talk to it is that application. Whereas remote services can be accessed across multiple apps. So it has exported set to true. And so the host application can talk to the service, as well as other applications on the Android device can also talk to that service as well. So when you launch the wizard, you're presented with these four possible choices here, whether you're going to create a local service, an intent local service, which is asynchronous, a remote service, or an intent remote service, which is asynchronous and communicatable with by other applications. The data module the service is based on for the local service and remote service is the same, and then the intent local, intent remote service is the same. It's both going to be using either the intent service data module, or the non-intent service data module. So now let's do some quick demonstrations to show you how to use services. First, I'm going to do a minimal Android service. It's just really the basics of making an Android service so you can see how all the parts fit together. So we're going to start with a new multi-device application in Delphi. And we're going to put down a label on here just to label what it is. And preview it in Android. There we go. Now we're going to add to our project a new project, Delphi Projects Android Service. We're going to stick with local service right now. And we're going to add a little bit of code here. On start command. So this keeps the service running. Now we're going to give our service a friendly name. And we'll give our project a friendly name. This is our app. And now we save everything. And we build our service. Then we add the service to our host app by selecting Android, add Android service, browse to the folder that has Android and Java classes folders in it, hit next, and finish. We're done. We've included the service in here. So now we need to start our service. We do that by coming in here, add this here, a reference to our service, and then in the constructor here we're going to say service equals t local service connection dot create and f service dot start service, and then the friendly name we gave it, which is RAD service. And now we can run this on our Nexus 5. Here it is running on the Nexus 5. It's just displaying the form which says service host. But I'm going to switch over to settings, and we see here that RAD host is running with one process and one service. I can start it, and we see here we have RAD host with the RAD service running inside the RAD host process. I can come over here, dismiss RAD host, come back, and see it restarting, and it keeps it running because it's sticky. So I wanted to build a new demo for the skill sprint that's different than some of the previous service demos I've put together, and do something hopefully I think is a little more useful. Actually collaborated on a similar project to this with one of my MVPs in India, Nirav, and so some of the code we came together I used in this, but this is really a whole new service demo. The idea behind this is it's going to collect the user's location while the application's maybe closed in the background. The service is going to be always running, and post that information to a web service, and then the host application can then display that information to the user. A couple interesting things came up in doing this, and I'll explain those as we go along. So here's the service. It's a local non-intent service, and we're going to start it with the start command and sticky, like I showed you in the minimal service. So this means the host is going to start it, but it's not going to actually interact with it. It just starts the service, and then the service is just going to run in the background and collect that location information, posting it to the web service. Now I didn't need the full REST client for this. I'm posting it to Firebase, which is really, really easy to post data to. And so all that's done here, let's go ahead and look at the code on this. Here's where we're posting the location. And so I'm just composing a JSON document here. I guess I could have used the JSON builders, but I just used a format statement, or not format statement, concatenated some strings together. Probably should have used the JSON builders. Anyway, so we put those in here. It's push it into a stream for the body, and all we do is call HTTP post, passing in the URL we want to go to, which is the URL for my Firebase database I want to use, and post the body to it. And we're using the logging here to log this information, so that way you can view what's going on from the log viewer, which makes debugging easier. Although you can set breakpoints in here and debug this just like you would in any other application as well. You can debug into the service as well as the host application. So for collecting the location, currently the location manager is not working in services. I suspect that's going to be fixed in update 1, so stay tuned for update 1. But a lot of the things in the FireMonkey namespace, as well as some other things that try and invoke activities at some point, end up not working in services because you can't touch activities. Previously, it wasn't a big deal. Everything could touch an activity on Android because it was on an application. But now in services, they're refactoring some of this code. So what we've done here is we've created a location manager from scratch, you just using the Android APIs. So this isn't really a whole lot of code here. There's a couple other event handlers down below, but there's not a lot of code here just because it's that easy to work with the Android APIs. So what we're doing here is we're turning on request location updates, and we have a location listener down below, and that location listener is going to receive an update event from the location manager service. But we also go ahead and say get last known location. So what this is going to do is it's going to say, if you previously had a location, just give it to me now, and we'll post that to get started. And then what we do is we create a loop here, and inside the loop, it's going to request location updates. And actually, this should be, I guess, after the sleep, because I changed that. So it's going to sleep for 10 seconds, which is probably not long enough. You're probably going to sleep for maybe a couple minutes. Otherwise, it's really going to be gathering too much data unless you really want to have some really accurate location data. But for demo purposes, 10 seconds was easy enough that it wasn't doing it constantly, but that I could see what was happening. And it's going to request location updates again. So what happens down here in our event handler when we get the on location changed is we actually remove updating. And so it says I don't want updates anymore. And the reason we do that is because if we don't do this, then every time the location changes by minute amount, which could just be that the location service is getting a more accurate bearing on the GPS antenna, then it will fire that event again, and we'll be collecting lots of data. We don't want that to happen. We just want to collect data once every, in this case, 10 seconds. And so we turn off location updates here. We log that we're events fired, and then we post the location, which just goes back to the post location code. So that's really all there is to the service side of this. The actually in here, so it's on the start command. Service start command is where we're handling this, and here we're saying start sticky. Okay, that's it. That's all there is to the service here. So let's go ahead and take a look at the host form. So this is the host application. And on the form here, we have a grid because I'm displaying latitude and longitude. And I'm using here a interesting combination. I'm using the net HTTP here to do the get command to get the JSON from the Firebase. Now, Firebase is a cool web-based database. It has a really easy-to-use REST API, but the way it encodes the REST is kind of weird. And so what I did is I created an aggregate here, Firebase aggregate, that takes the JSON that I get from the service and converts it into, basically flattens it out so that it can be viewed in our put in a data set, because the way it defaults to putting it in there is each record has a name, which is just a random string, and then that record contains an object that is the data you want. And so we can't put that in the data set because it's all these embedded objects, and there's no consistent name between all of them. So I wrote the post first, and the post worked great. And I was like, oh, this is fabulous. And then I went to read it out. I'm like, oh, this is useless. So I just made this little simple aggregate here, which in this case is using the JSON readers and writers, and just goes through here and reads all the tokens out and then flattens it out, moving the name into the same level as the data, calling it _ID like MongoDB does, and then writing it out. And I put the freeze in here because I was debugging it on the desktop side, but they're not necessary on Android, so you could comment those out. And then on the button click, which is our refresh button, we're going to perform the get in order to get that JSON, and that's all there is necessary to get the JSON. There's no authentication turned on. Although Firebase does support authentication, by default, you get this random string, and so technically, I guess that's your security, is that no one else knows what your string is, and it's all encrypted under HTTPS. So yeah, not very secure, but it's better than nothing, I guess. And so we get the JSON, and then I'm going to I created my REST response because the TREST response doesn't have the ability to set content. You can't set content on it, but this uses the protected procedure hack workaround, if you want to call it that. and so that I can call set content on the REST response, which then connects to the REST dataset adapter and pumps that JSON to the dataset. Probably an easier way to do it, but that was the thing I came up with really quick. So there we go. Let's go ahead and take a look at this running. I'm already running here on my Nexus 5. I'm hit the refresh button, and we see there's the data I have. I'm going to go over to Firebase really quick and actually flush all the locations out. So I hit refresh again. Oh, yeah, it's giving me an error because there's no data. There we go. Now there's some data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to exit my application out. And so when I've done that, I've exited. When the application exit, it actually kills the service then. But since the service was started sticky, the OS is relaunching that service in the background. And so you see the little pin that just came up here at the top. That means the location service kicked in and disappeared again. And it'll come back in a second again. We'll see there it is again. So every 10 seconds, it's going out and pinging the location. See it appeared again, the little location pin up in the top bar, and now it's gone. Okay, so that means it is going out and collecting location in the background. So I can now go ahead and launch my location host again, and I hit refresh, and we see we've got more locations collected. So it was collecting locations in the background even when the service wasn't running. 10 seconds is probably too frequently, like I said, but you can see that's working here. Now you notice all my locations are different. That's because I modified the code here in the location service unit right here. So I'm multiplying it by a random number, and that's because I don't want everybody to see my latitude and longitude because I'm shooting this from home. So yeah. The location is accurate, it's consistent across all of these, but I'm just obscuring it there with that little bit of random numbers thrown in. So I don't know if anybody caught that in the code, but yeah, that's what's happening there, and that's why the values here are inconsistent. Now I am running, I'll show you here, this is Android device monitor. So this is, you can find this in your tools directory. And occasionally it does this where it loses connection to the ADB logs. So let me go ahead and close this and relaunch it again, and I'll show you where it's at. So in your platform SDKs, Android SDK Windows tools folder, there's a batch file here called monitor, and you can add this to your tools folder there, your tools menu. And it takes a second to launch because it's in Java, unfortunately. But okay, there it is. It just came up. And I have a filter set up here for only telling me applications have Embarcadero in the name, which is the default for all the applications. And we can see the log events that I have in here are firing. So you can see what happened here. And so you can come up here and you can see things like creating service started, location created, so that's where it created the location monitor, posting services, and then a location change event fired. So useful for debugging, like I said, because you can see what's happening inside the service, although you can set breakpoints and debug just like you would in any normal application, any normal Android application as well. So there you go. So real quick, reminders, some restrictions. You can't access user interface. Also, you can't use any components in the FireMonkey namespace. Some of the other components will also generate errors as well. You get an error about not being able to find the activity. So if you do get those error messages, you just need to go to a lower level. And some of this stuff is going to be updated in update 1. So when update 1 comes out, you can certainly take a look at that and possibly take advantage of some higher level components. Be aware, though, that because your service can continue to run in the background, you can use up a lot of power or a lot of data. That service can just keep running in the background continuously, and you don't know what you could end up using up. You could run down the user's battery, you could do a lot of things. And so they'll see this when they go into the application management and their battery also starts dying. They'll go look and say, oh, this app used up all my battery. Uninstalled. It's gone. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. So definitely be aware of that as you respect the user's expectations and privacy in building your services. So I mentioned some of these already. You want to make sure you're using RTL or low-level calls instead of FireMonkey components. If the service fails when started, use your lower-level calls. Sometimes just including that unit. If that unit has links to UI elements. If it tries to instantiate an activity or access an activity, you'll fail. You need to manually edit to make services remote, and you can find the workarounds for the Java templates there at that blog post. And it includes a download that you can download and replace those templates as well. So for more information, there's a couple DocWiki links there. These are the tutorials. They also link to the library documentation. There was a session at Code Rage 10 that shows building of services, a lot more information with one of our developers from R&D. And then here's some blog posts for you. That first one's a list. I'm going to link to all the blog posts I have tagged with services, which is going to cover quite a few of those with source code downloads and more information. And the second one's a link to a blog post that shows you how to build a service to download an image in the background. Next time, we have David I. talking about GPU computing with OpenCL. This is actually really exciting stuff, something I've not experimented with at all yet, but David I. is going to go ahead and cover this and tell us more information about how to do this. So I'm really looking forward to this session, and hopefully you can join us on Tuesday the 17th at the times you see there. Now, all the times are based on San Francisco time, so make sure that you verify that your time zone is correct time with daylight savings time and everything like that. So let's take a look at some of the special offers for RAD Studio 10 Seattle. Purchase Delphi, C++ Builder, or RAD Studio 10 Seattle before December 31st, and you can take advantage of upgrade pricing from any previous version. You also get the bonus pack that's available to all registered users. The bonus pack includes More Coding in Delphi by Nick Hodges. This book covers writing solid code, aspect-oriented programming, a number of different patterns, as well as parallel programming. You also get Marco Cantu's new Object Pascal Handbook. This is a modern language guide that includes new language features, as well as some great coverage of the runtime library. The MIDA Converter Basic is a great tool to get you started in converting existing VCL applications into FireMonkey applications, so you can take advantage of cross-platform application development. And the VCL and FireMonkey premium styles are a great way to make your application look great and stand out. You can even synchronize styles between VCL and FireMonkey for a consistent look and feel across platforms. To find out more information about these special offers, check out embarcadero.com/radoffer. That's it for me today. Hopefully you're online live with us, and you'll be able to join us now for the live Q&A. So there's a question here about is this not supported in C++? So in 10 Seattle, it was not released with C++ support. It was only released with Android support. There were a couple things they're trying to figure out with C++, and they're working on that for a future release. So sorry about that for C++ developers. But yeah, they're working on that, and hopefully when the C++ one comes out, they'll have all the little nuances, the templates and stuff like that fixed up in C++, so it'll all work great out of the box. I apparently had edited out the part where I talked more about some of the problems with the templates, but I do a blog post here. Let me find it for you real quick. So there's a blog post here, this Android services and presentations and workarounds on delphi.org, which is linked to on the screen. Has a link to the workarounds you can download. And so the workarounds show how to fix them with templates. So the problem is there's some Java templates that are generated. When you're linked to the service, you have to point to that folder those Java templates are at, and those templates had some bugs in them for some reason. I'm not sure why. Something didn't get checked in right. So anyway, download these. It explains how to install those and set that up, and it works out great. So there's a question here about remote services. So what that means, remote services means other apps on the device can talk to that service. So by default, or with local services, only apps within that bundle. So how we had the host app includes the service. So it can include multiple services, for example, but the host app can talk to all the services that are bundled with it. But then if you want to be able to have other apps talk to those, then it needs to be set as a remote. And so, like I said, setting as remote just sets the manifest so that the service is published and exported to other devices, on other apps on the device. Now, as far as If you wanted to have other apps outside the computer, that would be something you'd use app tethering for, or maybe you could talk to EMS service or data snap or something like that, and that would be the way you could, or like I showed here with the Firebase. So the services, Android's not designed around being a server operating system, so your services you're going to have on there are local access only, because that's what's logical. As far as when do I anticipate update 1 release, I really don't know, so you'd have to stay tuned for that. I don't know for sure, and yeah, I would expect it soon, but what soon means before the next release. When it's ready, yeah, exactly. One tip that I had, and I can't believe it didn't make it in my presentation here, is that you should always put your Android service in a separate folder than the host project. And the reason is because sometimes you want to remove and re-add the service or something along those lines. And if it's in the same project as the host project, then it's harder to point it to the right directory. Once you've added that service, it actually imports the files from the service into the host project. And so if you point it to the folder again, then it says, oh, here's the service, and it grabs the old version of the services and the new version of the service. So always put your service in its own folder. Okay, that just makes things so much simpler to maintain. So it says here, I wrote that services or threads cannot access the user interface using synchronize, which works in Windows, doesn't work in Android. So you can synchronize a thread or a task on Android, although I recommend using queue over synchronize. That still works the same as it does on Windows for a service or task. But once you've done synchronize or task, is you've actually moved outside of the thread. So you're not accessing it from the thread. The thread has marshaled execution or marshaled something out of the thread into the main thread to update the UI. So that's what I meant when I said some sort of marshaling to take place. And so with services, there's no synchronize you can use on a service. You can post something using like an intent back to the host application or something like that, but you can't say synchronize and go back to the UI. So from a service, and since this is all about services, you can't access the UI. So just using synchronize to write to a form will not work on Android. It does. If you check out the code rate sessions I did on multi-threading, I think I did them. Somebody else, a few people did them. But yeah, you can use synchronize and queue to update the UI from a thread or a task, but not from a service. And so I didn't get into that today at all because we're talking about services. But I wanted to make the analogy of the similarity in that you don't touch the UI from a service, just like you can't from a thread unless you marshal it. So this is the link here that has, let's see, oops, here it is. If you go to delphi.org/tag/android-services, there's 4 blog posts here, and I believe this blog post actually links to another blog post on community as well. So some good information here on Android services. I will have the rest of the slides and such available later on up on this URL here, embt.co/sprint-android-services. So check that out.
Can you go over again, because I know this was a question earlier, your statement about you can't access the UI from services, but you could have something in your client app that would read data from wherever it is that's being generated by the service and then do something with the UI. Is that correct?
Right. So there's a few options you can do. So in the example I showed there, I was posting the data to a database that happened to be via a REST service. And then in the client, I was reading that data. So you could have something like that where you're posting it to a database or some other storage resource and then read it as you need it from the client application. You could have the service send an intent to the client application, and that intent would notify the client that there's some updated data or something along those lines, and then the client would then upload that data in at that point. You could also use notifications. So you have the background service send notification to say, hey, I've finished my task. And then the user could tap that notification, and then that would trigger in the client to load the data. So the link to the download image, I believe that uses a notification to say the image is finished downloading. You tap that, and it loads the image.
Okay, and I know this is different technology and different platform, but should developers think about services like they would think if they're a Windows developer, Windows services, where these things are running deep underneath somewhere, and then you can do something with whatever those services are doing? Maybe it's not the same. I'm thinking more from an application metaphor standpoint, maybe.
Yeah, well,
actually, you can build Windows service apps in Delphi or C++ builders.
Yeah, exactly, and it's a good point. The services on Android actually fill a couple niches. First of all, when we develop an Android application with FireMonkey, we actually have a lot of advantages over the traditional way applications are developed, because in traditional Java development on Android, the intents have each screen in the app is a different intent, and there's very limited what's happening. Basically, your code has to be functioning within an intent, or it's not functioning unless it's in a service. And so the ability to have code that's not tied to not an intent, I'm sorry, within an activity, code that's not tied to an activity has to be in a service. So anything that's going to be functioning between two different screens in a Java application has to be in a service. And so in that case, that's where the local service comes in. It's really important that you have this ability to have something going on between activities. Now, when you look at the ability to have a service attached to different OS events like boot or connect to a GPS or Wi-Fi or something along those lines, there's a whole series of events. And you can do that by modifying your manifest, and Google has documentation on that. But once you look at them that way, then they're more like Windows services. So they are some sort of entity running in the background that may be on, may be off. Other apps can start it and stop it. That would be a remote service at that point if other apps are interacting with it. And then yeah, that's more like a Windows service. So yeah, services fill a couple niches. The local service is going to be local only to your application, but you could have a local service that is running beyond the life cycle of your application as well. So when your application comes back, you can then reconnect to that service and find out new information.
And then remote service is not really accessing remotely from the Android device, is it? It's not that you can do something externally that would come into your Android device.
Right. Yeah. So it's remote. It's remote in reference to the host application. So the host application, the application that has the service installed into it, can always access the service, but then whether or not other applications on the same device can also access that service. So if it's remote,
so they still have to be on device.
Yeah, on device. If you wanted to access something from another device, if you wanted to let another device access your application, you'd use something like app tethering at that point. That would be a great solution to do that. Put app tethering in, and then other devices could talk to your device.
Okay. Now it makes sense. I mean, I probably have a tablet that doesn't have a GPS hardware or some other kind of hardware, and I could use my phone for that and then use tethering between two Android, a tablet and a phone, or like the phone service, for example, if my tablet doesn't have a phone built in.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Does this relate at all to iOS in any way other than this is, again, Android-specific technology and project templates?
So this is the idea of having a separate process that can function outside of your application is unique to Android. iOS has a different thing called background execution models, which is the idea where your application can continue to function in a limited sense in the background. So it's kind of similar, except that on iOS, you can't have your application start up on boot or on some other event. So it's just that if your user's using the app and then switches out, you can say, hey, my app's still got something going on in the background. don't kick it out of memory yet. Now, I've had situations like apps that I have that on my iOS device that have audiobooks or maps or something like that, where I'll be doing something else on the phone at the same time while those in the background, and all of a sudden they just disappear because they'll eventually get pushed out. And there's no concept of a sticky background execution model like Android has to say relaunch me if I get lost. So they're different. Everything I showed here is specific to Android. There is in 10 Seattle, it does have the ability to support background execution models. Its ability to just add this to your info plist, and then you just have to, if you're saying I'm going to do location stuff in the background, then just a matter of having your application track location automatically. I think Marco Cantu actually has some blog posts from a while ago about specifically doing that on iOS, where he was manually modifying the info plist, but now you can have that modified automatically.
Yeah, in 10 Seattle, it's in the project options. I think it's in the version info. I think it's a new last entry in version info.
Yes. Yep.
That you turn on true as background execution if you have an iOS target. Yeah. Sergio's asking, is it possible to configure an Android service that auto starts when the device is rebooted? Is that just on boot?
Yes.
Or is reboot different than on boot?
I'm not sure exactly the nuances of the different events you can tie to, but there is an event that you can tie to on that. If it seems like I remember correctly, you could actually have a service that launches whenever someone starts an app even. There's a huge list of events you can tie to. And actually, I'm just going to look here. I don't see the page from the Android notes offhand here, but I will look for that and add it to the blog notes. But it's just a matter of modifying your manifest to say where or what events you're looking for, and then it will do that. I left my email open. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
There's a lot of good resources there on the learning resources. There's 4 blog posts on Delphi.org, and including slides I did from an hour-long presentation in Brazil on Android services, and the link to the Android services video from Code Rage 10. So, and that's by someone else altogether. So from R&D, and he's going to come at it differently and talk about different things. And so it's good to get 2 different points of view, I think, on stuff like this.
And you mentioned before there is a separate service, Android services demo, that is in the samples folder, right?
There's one that's related to beacons in the samples folder.
Okay.
And then those blog posts, I think there's 4 or 5 different Android service samples available there as well.
If any of you are C++ people, the team is working on that. The work didn't get done for 10 Seattle, but it'll be in a future release, so that you'll be able to do the same this same programming for C++ Builder in the future. So stay tuned for that to appear in a future release. But C++ in 10 Seattle has other great stuff. It's got C++ 11 for Win32. And a whole bunch of other capabilities, including the ability to use the parallel programming library completely from C++, futures and everything. I'll be blogging this week about how to do all of that. I've shown a lot of it in Code Rage and elsewhere before, but we'll show more. I'm going to show you some stuff that the R&D team has been showing me about how you can use the right casts and use lambdas in the same places that Delphi people would use anonymous methods in tasks and futures and for loops of the parallel programming library. So stay tuned this week to my blog for that. And the teams are working on all sorts of stuff as we move forward. So nothing's stopped, and the key is to get to 10 Seattle, right? 10 Seattle has all the latest capabilities, has Windows 10 support, has C++ language support, has new VCL components for Windows 10 that you can also use in Windows 7, Windows 8. So there's a lot of great stuff.
10 Seattle is a very significant release because not only did we see the number of improvements to VCL, but we also saw a lot of improvements on the other platforms as well. So it's very well rounded, and then it has the larger memory model modification to the IDE, which everybody's reporting is incredibly increased the stability of the IDE, which is great, especially for working on large projects. So very, very significant release in 10 Seattle.
Alan's just saying 10 Seattle was the smoothest, fastest upgrade for existing projects we've had since we started with Builder One. That's a great. Here, let me put a big smiley on that one. That's a great testimonial, and I'll pass that along to the team. They love hearing that. There's obviously always more that we'll do, and there's more that Microsoft is doing with Windows 10, and there's more that Apple is doing, and Google is doing, and we're on top of all of it. And we'll keep doing that. We did a couple hot fixes. There was one for the Delphi 64-bit compiler, and we did some other things and some notes about how you can support iOS 9 and work with it very smoothly. So we're on top of those things, and there'll always be more that's happening as well. Let's see. Our service is some sort of jargon. So, Jim, maybe you come back again and talk about, we had talked earlier about services in the Android context versus the Windows context or other services as well.
So services, in Windows, we have Windows services which run in the background. On Linux and OS 10, I believe they call them daemons, that are background processes that run outside of an application. So Android also has that, so you can run services, for example, if you're building an app with Java, then each activity has its own processing going on. So if you want processing that's accessible for multiple activities, then you need to use a service. Whereas with FireMonkey, you can have processing that takes place outside the intent, inside your program module itself, or data module or something else. So it's much more flexible. But still, services gives you the ability to have something that runs when your application is not running, or some sort of running process that can be accessed from multiple applications. So that's the purpose of services.
Can we have a demo of an Android service being updated by a DataSnap server callback and pushing the message to the app? Do you think that's possible?
So one of the I don't know if I think was a post on Community showing an Android service being talked to from a Windows socket. So the Windows socket was connecting to the Android service and talking to the Android service, and then causing the app to wake up when that happened. So you can take a look at that code. I need to look and make sure I link to that one, because I may not have linked to that one. But that's not using DataSnap callbacks. As far as using DataSnap callbacks, I think there may be some limitations in the using DataSnap from services right now. Hopefully that'll be fixed in update 1. I know I checked FireDAC, and there was one, I think it was the wait cursor component. The wait cursor component tries to connect to FireMonkey, which tries to instantiate a activity, which doesn't work from inside a service. So they're supposedly updating that from in update 1 as well. So hopefully in update 1 we can give it a shot. And so once you can get DataSnap to work from a service, which I suspect you should be able to, it should be able to connect to a server and then receive a callback and then wake up the server. So it should be possible. Like I said, check out the demo that Luis Navarro did, and if it's not in the list of links there, I'll add it to the list of links shortly. And that shows how to have a background service wake up its host app via a socket call, and then you could extrapolate that to DataSnap later.
And you had mentioned in the slides, and you were talking that you can do things that are in the system unit, right? You can do things, you just can't do things that are in the UI, FireMonkey, FMX namespace, and so on, right?
Yeah, and there are some that are in the system unit, so like location services in the system unit, but there was a couple places that it like goes to get like a file path, and it hits the Android activity to get the file path because of the way Android works. And so they're refactoring that to fix some of those things. There's a few places where even outside the FireMonkey namespace it doesn't work. But a lot of those things are going to be fixed in update 1, is what I've been told. We can look forward, hopefully, to see that done. So I hate to make forward-looking statements because you never know what's going to happen. I know they're working on fixing that, but there are some limitations. So that's the reason I used the location APIs. So honestly, this actually shows one of the cool things about FireMonkey is we get used to using these components and runtime library that makes it really, really easy to get a lot of stuff done. But it's still really easy to use the Java APIs on Android. And the reality is, everybody else on the planet that's doing Android development, that's the code they're writing, is those Java APIs. And so, the worst case scenario is you have to write as much code as everybody else, but most of the time you have to write, a tenth as much code. So anyway.
Okay, everyone, thank you very much. That was great. And we'll see you again next Tuesday. It'll be me, OpenCL, playing with stuff right now and battling through different processors, different GPUs to make sure it all works on my AMD and my Intel and my NVIDIA GPU chips. So it'll be fun to show that next week.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right. Bye, everyone. Take care.
Bye, everyone.